Well, good morning and welcome once again to Elevenses. It's Sunday, the 17th of July. It's a bit of a scorcher and it's going to get even warmer in the next few days. Now, I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and this is my twice weekly show. Don't forget, as usual, if you have any comments, any questions, anything you'd like to ask generally, any feedback on the show, anything you'd like me to cover in a future show, please do drop me a line. I'm more than happy to respond, and I'll try to do it on air if I possibly can. If I can't do it on air, I will get back to you at the end of the show. And Kevin has looked in. Good morning, Kevin. He says, just taking a break from loading the camper for Cadwell tomorrow. I don't think, Coldwell he's called it. I don't think it's going to be cold at Cadwell tomorrow. Take it easy out there. It's going to be hot. Right, so what have we got for you today? Well, red weather warning for extreme heat. I'll just talk briefly about that. The government have announced a consultation on electric bikes and timetable for their introduction. Dnepr sidecars have returned to military duties in the Ukraine conflict. The UN has green-lighted automatic driving systems for cars at up to 130 kilometres per hour. And in Australia, the Sikhs are fighting for the right not to wear helmets on motorcycles, whilst rumours suggest that the new Honda 750 family is growing to 4 models. And then finally, today's discussion point, which has sprung out of questions that have been asked online on my Facebook page. I'll be talking about armchair riding, as I call it, how to use visualisation to experience the future in the present. So settle yourself down for the next 30 minutes or so while I run through our stories. And we've also got Sue looking in, and Kevin has said Coldwell. Yes, I thought that was a joke, actually, Kevin. He says it's predictive text. It's actually, of course, Cadwell Park. Yes. Right. Okay. I thought you were being clever. So, all right, on with the show this morning. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about the red weather warning that's out from the Met Office. So I'm sure unless you have been living under a rock, you'll know all about this. And it's for the much of England. It's extending as far north as Manchester and Leeds, and it covers Monday and Tuesday, and the rest of England, Wales and southern Scotland gets an amber warning. Now, when I say unprecedented, the heat, the word really means what it says. The temperature is expected to crack the 38.701.7 Fahrenheit record tomorrow, reaching 40 or even over 40 in the London area, right up into the East Midlands, sort of across into Norfolk area. It'll remain high on Tuesday, maybe coming down just a degree or so before the temperature drops away on Wednesday. Now, the level 4 UK Health Security Agency health alert has been issued. So, this is something to take fairly seriously. People are already saying, it's not as bad as 1976. Trust me, it'll be hotter. It's much, much hotter across much, much more of the country. So it doesn't mean today will be cool, of course. If you are out on the bike, do bear in mind that the sun will be pretty unrelenting and temperatures will climb steadily through the day into possibly the low 30s in the south of England. So if you do have to travel by motorcycle, don't forget to cover up. T-shirt and shorts may give the illusion that you're staying cool, but in fact, with the sun being this high in the sky at the moment, the UV light is really strong, and you're actually allowing that radiation to heat your body. So if you can, do your riding when the sun is lower in the sky. It will still be warm later this evening, but at least you won't be getting a direct heating from the sun. Monday and Tuesday, I would just avoid riding the bike if you possibly can. Something else to watch out for, melted tar. Now, that is bound to be a problem. It's guaranteed to be an issue by this weekend. So if you are out on the bike, do watch for slippery tar, stone chips coming loose on corners in particular, and be aware that the road melts where it faces the sun. So if you've got a hill which is going north, and watch the surface there, it's likely to be particularly melted. Something else I forgot to mention in my Skills on Saturday post last week, it's probably a good idea to check your coolant levels before you go out, and maybe even declog your radiator if it's full of mud from the winter. Now, as of 8 AM Saturday, the DVSA had not cancelled bike tests. All services are currently unaffected. So if you do have a bike test scheduled, check with your instructor what the plans are, but do make sure you get plenty of fluids down you before you go out on that test ride. If you want to review last Saturday's tips and find out what I had to write about the problem, the easiest way is to head over to my coffee page, and you can find the article, and it's free to read over there. Right. Kevin Paul has also looked in. Good morning. Nice to see you, Kevin. So, right, okay, what else then? Well, it's basically been a year since we learned that motorcycles were part of the government's decarbonisation plans, and last week a new public consultation into ending the sales of non-zero emission L category vehicles was actually announced. Now, that plan sets the date for the complete ban on petrol engine two-wheelers by 2035, but the government has already suggested that they hope to be able to speed up the transition to zero emission travel, and that would mean phasing up sales of ICE motorcycles and mopeds before that 2035 date. So that is a backstop date, not the date it could happen, which is something that seems to be confusing some of the motorcycle industry and representative bodies. So anyway, the consultation seeks feedback from the public and the motorcycle industry alike. Submissions need to be in by 21st of September, so you've got a couple of months in hand. The government have indicated that a summary of the responses will be published within 3 months of the consultation closing, so that would be neatly coinciding with the Christmas holiday, December 2022. Maybe they hope to hide it in the Christmas break. Anyway, you can respond to the survey at the link which I have just posted up. Now, out in the Ukraine, we've kind of got used to seeing unusual vehicles being used as part of the military response to the Russian invasion. But the latest video doing the round on Twitter is showing soldiers standing beside Dnepr sidecar outfits. Each is apparently equipped with an anti-tank guided missile. Now, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, as I said, has thrown up some unconventional vehicles. But if the images in the video, which you can have a look at through the link, which I'm just about to put up, if they look like something from the Eastern Front in World War II, that's because the Dnepr motorcycle is actually an updated version of the bikes that were being used by German forces in World War II. So the factories and tooling was seized by the Soviets as war reparation after 1945. Now, experts have pointed out that there would be backblasts from the missiles and that they are not actually mounted on the sidecar but perched on a tripod. So it's more likely that the three-wheeler is actually being used to transport the missiles to a place they will be used rather than as a mobile launcher. But anyway, you can have a look for yourself and find the video here. Back to the electric story. Kevin says, I'm yet to be convinced there'll be adequate infrastructure or charge points, especially when we consider vehicle uses in urban multi-occupancy dwelling settings absent of adequate. Yes, absolutely. As I've said before, I live in a Victorian street here. There is no parking on the front of the house. There is no way that I'm going to be running a 240 volt cable across the pavement to a vehicle. So the answer basically is that the infrastructure has to go in somewhere else. So yes, there are going to be problems. I suspect that it may have to be that they go to a hybrid system first before they go full electric. But hey ho, that's not my problem. It's somebody else's to work out. As is the motoring laws and their harmonisation across the world. Now, many people blame the EU for motoring laws that affect us here in the UK, particularly when they don't like them, of course. But the fact is that it's actually United Nations that actually creates many of the directives for the rules, and this is to harmonise what happens around the globe. Now, the latest is an amendment to UN Regulation number 157, and that does two things. It extends the maximum speed for automated driving systems, ADS, for passenger cars and light-duty vehicles to a maximum of 130 kph on motorways. Now, the current limit is 60 kph, and that was introduced as recently as January 2021. The second thing this change does is it allows the vehicles to make fully automated lane changes. Now, the automated driving system can only be activated legally on roads where pedestrians and cyclists are prohibited, and which by design are equipped with a physical separation that divides traffic moving in opposite directions. In other words, we're talking motorways here in the UK. Now, the regulation also requires that the system be tested with motorcycles near the autonomous vehicle as well as other passenger cars. And these revisions will come in from January 2023, so just 6 months or so away. Now, frankly, it's hard to see how such a short period, 2 years, when there are so few jurisdictions which actually allow for fully autonomous cars to operate at the moment, can be considered a valid test of the lower speed regulations. Now, as with all these systems, the obvious weak point is that the driver needs to stand ready to take manual control of the vehicle any moment. And the idea that somebody can do that whilst being off the driving task I think is extremely doubtful. Anyway, coming on to the testing issue, European Federation of Motorcyclists Associations, FEMA, now they believe that motorcycle safety, they say, has to be the highest priority when automated cars change lanes at high speed. Well, I would say it has to be a priority, but frankly, all road users need to be considered. FEMA's General Secretary, Dolph Willigers, said FEMA has been asking for mandatory tests for automated vehicles to include motorcycles and other powered two-wheelers for years, and we're pleased to see that the amended regulation now considers rider safety as important as driver safety. Now, they say that back in October 2016, they expressed their concern regarding vehicles using these driver aids, such as adaptive cruise control and their ability to detect motorcycles. And I believe it was Jaguar here in the UK that admitted that their original driver assist systems hadn't actually been tested with two-wheelers. And subsequently, the Netherlands Vehicle Authority, the RDW, investigated how well autonomous vehicles are detecting motorcycles. There's certainly one high-profile crash involving a Tesla and a stationary motorcycle. And word is that the research that the Netherlands Vehicle Authority did actually shows that cars with adaptive cruise control struggle to spot motorcycles. Excuse me. They struggle to spot motorcycles when the rider is riding at the edge of a lane. So that's something perhaps we need to start taking into consideration when we're talking about positioning on multi-lane roads. And they said that in many of the tests events that they performed, the driver actually had to take action to prevent the car hitting the motorcycle. Now, the UN regulation does set out clear performance-based requirements, including on test tracks and in real-world conditions, and they must be complied with before the manufacturers put these vehicles on sale. So that's a good step forward. Sorry, my hay fever's literally just hit me as I started talking today. My final morning right up until about 10 minutes ago. Now, don't forget, while you are online, set a reminder Come back every Wednesday and Sunday at 11. The show normally goes out live, very occasionally goes out recorded, and even more rarely I do have to miss a show from time to time when other events take precedence. But generally speaking, you'll get 2 shows a week, and of course you can always catch up with them over on my YouTube channel, which is Survival Skills with the all-important UK tacked on the end. If you don't put the right URL in, you will end up on the wrong channel. So, right. Okay, now here in the UK, of course, helmets are compulsory for all riders except followers of the Sikh religion. Now, Sikhs belonging to a Sydney-based group, or the Singh Social Motorcycle Club, are demanding the exemption in the Australian law that requires them to wear helmets when riding a motorcycle. One of the club's founders, Mavlin Singh Deer, 37, said that the push was bigger than just wanting riders to go helmet-free, and he points out that turbans are a symbol of freedom and equality in their religion. And Mr. Deer says it takes around 15 minutes to put a turban on correctly, and that going helmet-free should be an option. The organisation has actually cited laws in New Zealand which allow Sikhs to ride a motorcycle minus helmet up to 50 kph or 30 miles per hour. And he was asked if his club had a set speed in mind. And he said it was basically impossible for police monitoring to work out how fast every turbaned rider were going. But he did suggest that inexperienced riders should not be given these freedoms. And the group recently rode down to Canberra, where they spoke about the Sikh contribution to World War I. And he said, we're pushing for this not just for the motorcycles, it's more to do with freedom of choice, adding that Sikh soldiers in Gallipoli didn't wear helmets. He says, when I'm wearing that turban, I have a sense of responsibility that won't allow me to do anything wrong. I have to treat everyone equal. Now, Amir Singh, who's the president of Turbans for Australia, said that compulsory hard hats on construction sites was another issue for the Sikh community. He said, I'm not in favour of breaking any laws, which is why I've chosen not to ride my bike, but the government should be fairer to the people of the Sikh community and allow us to be exempted from helmet and hard hat laws. Wearing turban is a matter of faith, and being Australian is always about being fair to everyone else. Now, for bicycle riders in Victoria, Western Australia, Queensland and South Australia, there are all exemptions for wearing a helmet under religious reasons, but New South Wales apparently offers no such exemption for helmets on push bikes. In the Northern Territory, head coverings are only mandatory for adults on the road. Those under 17 and under must wear them on footpaths and in other public places. Footpaths? I shouldn't think the Australians allow bicycles to be ridden on footpaths. I suspect that's probably cycleways. Anyway, I just thought that was an interesting story. What else have we got here? Kevin said, my sister as a driving passenger drifts off and then panics when I'm carrying out a less than simple manoeuvre. Right, okay, we'll come on to that later. So, all right, some bikes then. Now, as you probably remember, I talked about the Honda CB400 finally being struck from the Honda's model range after several decades in production, which is a bit of a shame because I've always thought that was one of their nicest little bikes. But it's not a surprise then to see that if they are producing a new motor, they are going to make the best of it. Now, you've probably seen the new 750cc twin mentioned in stories. Let me just try and get the picture up. There we go. It's going to be used to power a new Transalp. I think that's probably a render of the bike because it's not actually been released yet. It's to be a baby brother to the successful Africa Twin, basically. And there is also a Hornet 750 likely that has been shown as well as a sort of a render, direct competitor probably to the MT-07, the Naked. Now, word is that the Hornet, only seen in design sketches so far, has actually now been spotted testing in Spain. Now, I haven't seen any photos, and it's highly likely that those two bikes will debut at the autumn shows. But now the news is that the model range is going to expand further, and there will be a CBR 750, which is this bike here, CBR 750RR. And it's likely, of course, that it will go toe-to-toe with Yamaha's newish R7 sports bike. So we can see the CBR there. And there's also likely to be a Hawk 75, and that is likely to take its styling cues from the Hawk 1100, which was introduced earlier this year with the NT 1100 Africa twin engine in it. And it was a kind of retro style sports bike with a sort of top half fairing. I didn't particularly like it, to be frank. Honda are calling time on quite a number of their models due to emissions issues. And whilst there is still a few years left in the internal combustion engine, the way that all the manufacturers are going to get their most out of what they have is basically by diversifying around the engine and probably the frame as well. So that allows them to fill some mid-range holes, something that Honda has lacked rather, at minimum cost to the company. Now, there are two questions that I would say are worth asking. The first is what happens to the NC 750 range of bikes. Now, they've got a faithful following. My brother actually owns one out in the States and loves it, but they've never quite made the impact that Honda clearly hoped for. With those low revving and, if we're honest, somewhat underpowered motors. Now, I suspect time may be called on those models. I may be wrong. Second point is, what's the price point? Now, Honda, their Transalp and their Hornet were both budget bikes. They were neither particularly expensive. Unfortunately, the Africa Twin is at the other end of the market and is definitely not a budget motorcycle. So it will be interesting to see how Honda go about pricing these new bikes. Hopefully, they will be able to keep the prices down. Right, okay, so don't forget, if you do enjoy the show, you can also pop over to my coffee page, and if you fund me over there to the price of a coffee, you'll help me keep coming back and producing new shows and researching these news items for you. So every coffee over there is much appreciated, although I have to say it'll probably be a cold drink today as the temperature is climbing rapidly. Now, as you probably know, if you're a regular on here, I keep returning to the issue of bike theft, if only because bike theft keeps continuing. In the last of my commentaries on the topic, I did suggest that if perhaps manufacturers are made responsible for covering the cost of the theft of a new bike, rather than the owner and the insurance company having to battle, some of that profit that they make on bikes could soon be diverted into some improved security devices. Now, I did say that this isn't a UK issue either, and I did mention that the Lahore police have actually been calling for the licenses of motorcycle manufacturers to be removed if they don't do something in the very near future to address the theft issue in Pakistan. Now, in Italy, 3 bikes disappear every hour. So the problem is a worldwide one. Now, the bad news is that in the UK, motorcycle thefts seem to be on the rise again. It could be up 1/4 in 2022 over 2021 if the figures for the first 3 months of the year continue to rise through the rest of the year. Now, 18,000 motorcycles were reported stolen in 2021, and no less than 5,591 of those disappear completely. At the same time as the total of bikes being stolen has gone up in 2022, the percentage of bikes being recovered has fallen just 36%. So that's not wonderful news at all. That's quite a significant drop. So what's changed now? If they're to be believed, private motorbike tracking companies do claim recovery rates exceeding 90%. So it could be that fewer of the stolen motorcycles have trackers. That's possible, particularly as the boom in bike sales has been at the lower end of the market. The sort of scooters have been particularly successful. It could be that fewer bikes with trackers are being recovered as the thieves get more savvy to what is actually on the bike. It could be that more bikes are going unrecovered. Well, we know that for a fact. So what's the problem? It could be all three issues, of course. But the thing about trackers is that they can only work if people divert resources to finding the bike down. Now, how much does all this cost? I don't have figures for motorcycles and scooters, but I can give you a hint of the scale of vehicle theft in England and Wales. Now, an article that came out last week claimed that the bill to insurers is nearly £1.5 billion per year, and that's down to the theft of around 100,000 vehicles. Now, obviously, the insurers don't actually foot that bill. They recover it from us, the insurance holders, who pay for it in our policy. So it's basically the end user who will foot the bill. Now, interestingly, car theft has dropped. Presumably improved security may have had something to do with that. But despite trackers, the recovery rate has apparently plummeted. In 2006, around 80% of all vehicles were recovered. Now it's down to 28%. Now, one expert, the managing director and former police detective Philip Swift, who works for a company called CMA, he suggests that it's the nature of car theft which has changed away from cheap, cheerful, easy to steal vehicles being nicked for joyriding. They were often recovered but burned out. He now says that it's top of the range vehicles which are disappearing, and he cited the new Range Rover worth, sort of £100,000. And he says those are being stolen professionally and they're seldom recovered. Now, the result is that the amount the insurers are paying out on these vehicles has gone through the roof. It's up 500% over 15 years ago. He also pointed out that keyless technology and electronic security is frequently bypassed. He points to the fact that around half of vehicles that are recovered are undamaged, and that means a significant reduction in the number of damaged vehicles over the figures from a decade ago. It was just presumably broken windows and things like that, and hot wiring. Now, I'd like to see comparable data for motorcycles, but I have to say I'm not impressed with press releases like the one last month from Hampshire Police. They say they are stamping out motorcycle criminality and seizing nuisance bikes and those used in other crimes, and gave themselves a big pat on the back for recovering a stolen MT-07 just 6 minutes after it was reported stolen. Now, apparently what happened was the owner realised that the Yamaha was missing, phoned the police at 7:09 p.m. on June the 4th, and by 7:15 the bike had been spotted by two police officers. It was fitted with a tracker. Whether the tracker had anything to do with it, I don't know. Suspects apparently abandoned the vehicle when the police car was seen approaching, and a second suspect also on another bike and also fled the scene. Now, this rider was lucky, and so was a rider from Midlothian. His 125 was stolen in the few minutes it took him to walk from his mother-in-law's to the shops and back, and he reported it on social media, and thanks to the bike was actually recovered. It was spotted a few streets away and he was able to get that back, but he said basically the police haven't really done anything, and it was only down to local police posting and sharing that we managed to get it back. Now, meanwhile, South Yorkshire Police seem to have tacitly admitted they're overwhelmed by bike theft, and they said in a statement last month, do we have enough resources? No. Do we have a team dedicated to trying to stop it? Yes. Do we always get it right? No. Do we do our best with what we have? Yes. And they went on to say, you, the public, are victims of crime. Please don't shut us out and dismiss the police in general, or think that we won't do anything to help. It may feel like that at times, but there's always more happening than you think. But it does bring me full circle back to my original idea. If manufacturers were made responsible for the coughing up the bike theft, how much more effort would be put into preventing them being stolen in the first place. Right, okay, so apologies for boring you perhaps with the stories on theft, but I do think it is important. So, okay. Kevin says, let me get that up. We need secure ground anchors near homes when on-street parking is the only option. Yeah, that's one option, isn't it? I mean, there are many authorities now starting to talk about charging bikes for parking. It would be interesting to see if some of that money is actually diverted into security. I very much doubt it will be. Some of the bike parks around this way do have anchor points where you can lock a chain. And if you are parking with other vehicles, there's always the possibility of linking your chains into somebody else's chain, which makes life a little bit easy. And Sue says, found the theft stories very interesting, concern to us all. Thank you, Sue. I'm glad to know I'm not boring everybody. Right, so okay, on to the final point today, and this really follows on from what I've been talking about on my Skills on Saturday posts about the need to train ourselves basically to avoid distractions. Now, this technique is called visualisation, and the article I wrote was all about how we can improve our riding from an armchair. And given the 2 hot days of weather, maybe this is something you can try out whilst you're staying out of the sun. Now, I've been looking at how we learn by experience, but also by how we can top up our experience by using some stop and look drills, basically to spot things that are potential hazards and then to work out what threat they pose us. And what this does is it helps to develop what I call spidey sense. Something in our subconscious alerts us to the fact there's an issue, and then we are able to respond to that problem more effectively. Now, when we learn the correct cues, what happens is the unconscious part of our brain detects them. And next week, I'll talk about how the unconscious brain and the real-time thinking brain swap tasks over. But for the moment, just accept that much of our riding is actually dealt with by our subconscious brain. And what it does then, having spotted a cue, as I call them, something that is likely to cause us a problem. It could simply be a red traffic light. That is flagged up to the thinking brain, and that is where we actually become aware of many of the hazards on the road. It could be a bend warning sign, it could be a car appearing at a junction, it could be a biker coming the other way that we're about to wave to. But having had it moved up to our conscious brain, then our real-time brain makes a decision about what to do. So, for example, having seen a red traffic light, that's almost certain to happen once we've got a little bit of experience of using the road in our unconscious brain. But what it should trigger is a conscious decision to check the mirror and make an active assessment of the speed and distance of any following vehicles before we brake. But again, once we brake, we're not actually doing that consciously. We're not thinking about whether or how hard we're going to have to decelerate to stop in time. What we might well be doing, though, is scanning the road surface for any irregularities or slippery patches. Anyway, let's try and see how this works in practice. Now, back in the dim distant past, when I was a basic trainer, I was taking a lady to test, and it was at the time when the current off-road module was still some distance in the future. So the special exercises of the test, including the emergency stop, were actually carried out on road rather than at the test centre. And one afternoon, the examiner came back minus my lady candidate. Now, if the examiner returns minus trainee, there are several possibilities. The bike might have broken down, puncture, for example. The trainee could have lost the examiner. It does happen occasionally. Or, even incredibly rarely, never happened to me, the test might have been abandoned due to some dangerous riding, and the examiner simply won't continue and tells the trainee to sit tight and wait for the instructor to go and collect them. Or possibly the bike has been damaged. Now, it wasn't unknown for riders to topple off at walking pace on the U-turn and snap off a lever, so rendering the bike unrideable temporarily. I always used to carry spares for that reason. So when the instructor said that my trainee had crashed and was unhurt, I wasn't actually unduly worried until he told me that what had happened was that she locked the front end of the bike up trying to avoid a car that had pulled out from a junction and then sped off. And he said, that basically it was the wet surface that caught her out. But he said the odd thing is we'd only just moved away from doing the emergency stop, and she'd done a perfect one for me. And that got me thinking. Now, over the 5 days, Sue, that was my trainee's name, I remember that, she had performed at least 50 wet and dry emergency stops off-road during her training. And she was perfectly competent at making those stops off-road. We'd also used some quiet streets to carry out controlled stops on the road too, and there was no problem indicated on any of those stops. So we'd spent quite a long time basically building her ability to brake hard and to a level where she could brake consistently hard when she needed to. So I started doing a little bit thinking around and digging into the research, because I was wondering why it was that she did perfectly good e-stops in front of the examiner, yet when a real emergency happened just a moment later, she grabbed a big handful and crashed. And eventually, what I realized was that there are 3 problems with the way we teach emergency stops. The first is that we teach people off-road in a safe environment. The second is how we teach those stops. In the old days, it used to be the examiner raising a hand and signalling to the trainee to stop. In the new test, it's stopping as you cross into a box, and there's a speed gun there which you have to try and beat. But there's no real emergency in either of these situations. It's an exercise, it's a drill. And if anything, the off-road element of the motorcycle test has made it even less realistic than it used to be. The second thing to note is that the examiner, in raising the hand, gave the rider a nice visual cue to go straight into her emergency stop routine. And again, even on the current off-road module, we still do much the same sort of thing. The rider rides around, they know they're going to be doing their stop. So by the time the trainee actually does it on test, they have got a fairly well-oiled routine. But why is it that it didn't work when she was out on the road and the car pulled out in front of her? Well, the obvious answer is this. She had mastered the ability to brake hard. That was no question about that. But she actually had not got any awareness of when the situation might suddenly develop in which she would need to brake hard. So as soon as she hit a real life emergency, just a couple of seconds after doing the demo e-stop, she was taken completely by surprise. So everything I taught her went out to the window. Basically, all that happened was big hand for front brake, and on those pre-ABS bikes, the brake locked up and down the bike went. Now, it's just quite a scary revelation to me, because what it means is that all the hard work that we put into teaching people emergency stops, and even the swerve test, of course, now, doesn't mean that those riders are now equipped to deal with real life emergencies. So it's small wonder that despite all these years of bike training, the direct access came in 1997. The accident investigators, looking at the Smidsey crash, the very situation that she had to take evasive action to avoid, they find that the bike could usually have stopped, and it was the rider that failed to deliver. In many cases, the rider simply doesn't stop when there was plenty of space, or, as in my trainee's example, they fall off. Now, essentially, we have to find some way of synthesizing the real life emergency. Now, only half jokingly, many years ago, I said what we actually need to do is building some unpredictability into e-stop training. And I suggested that perhaps we could have a rubber car that we could push out in front of people. A rather better option would actually be to have a simulator where the rider can learn to brake hard in a safer environment, but responding to a visual threat. Now, airline pilots learn to fly in simulators and put through all manner of training situations, so they have an idea of what could happen before they actually get into a real-life plane and fly it. Increasingly, high-fidelity simulators are used in driver training research as well, because it's been realised that many of the early studies were unrealistic and based on photos and short video clips and things, or very contrived on-road trials. By using a simulator, you can get some really high-fidelity simulations of an environment and get some really good responses. Now, obviously, we can't afford a simulator at the average training school of the sort that you'll be putting a pilot in, but many years ago, back in the 1990s, in fact, I saw a sort of little simulator. It was a set of handlebars and a seat wired up to a PC, which came with 3 screens. So the idea was you have one screen sort of pretty much directly in front of you, and then there were 2 wraparound screens to give you the illusion of peripheral vision, and so you could turn your head and see what was going on to either side. It was designed to be cheap and cheerful and accessible to training schools. I never ever saw that project go any further, and there's still no software which anybody has written, to my knowledge, that allows a training school to run any decent simulations, bar one. There is one piece of software, and I do have it. So what can we do? Well, apart from that, we can exploit a technique from sports psychology. It's called visualisation, and it's a way of using our brain's own built-in simulator. We call it imagination. All we have to do is close our eyes and imagine the scenario we want to learn a response to. Now, the imagination has the brain fooled. It thinks, I've been here, I've done this, I know what I did last time, I know what I'm going to do next time. So essentially, by using our imagination, we simulate experience. We know we can learn by experience, so by using visualization, we actually learn by simulating that learning process. So the trick is, though, to make the imagination as vivid as possible. Don't just imagine seeing a car pulling out and going through the routine of rolling the throttle off, gently applying the front brake, gently applying the rear brake, progressively firmer squeeze on the front, and so on and so forth. See the whole emergency developing. Imagine yourself riding down the road, feel the breeze in your face, the images of things going past you, the hedgerows or whatever. Feel the bike riding over the road surface, and then see the junction signs, spot the gap in the hedge, spot the front of the motor car starting to appear in front of you. The more realistic we make that simulation, the more we fool the brain into thinking, aha, I've been here, I've done this before, when we see that same sort of situation developing on the road for real. And we can add to the fidelity by actually making the real life muscle movement, so throttle off, brakes on, for example. We can even talk to ourselves to help cement it. So when we're in a real life emergency, even though it's a situation we've never faced before, the brain will remember what you trained it to do. It'll come back to that been here, did this last time round, and it worked response that you've taught it to look for. Now, sports people and other performers have been using this technique for decades to avoid choking on the big screen. The sprinter who's used to running in front of a few hundred people at a sort of national level event, who suddenly finds themselves in front of 100,000 at the Olympics. The county cricketer making a debut at Lord's, the actor appearing in the West End for the first time in front of a crowd. They all use something along these lines. So basically, it's our memory, our simulated memory, that helps prevent us panicking and grabbing big handfuls of brakes. And we can use it for any number of other tasks. It doesn't have to be an emergency. Many riders struggle with the U-turn when I used to use it on road, and I used to get trainees to actually take a moment before they launch themselves onto the U-turn to actually visualize what they were going to do, to go through all the steps that got them successfully around a U-turn, sit there on the bike, eyes closed, do a few deep breaths to get themselves relaxed, run through that imaginary U-turn, and then do it for real. And they got a far better chance of completing that. We can use visualization if we don't ride very often. We can actively reprogram the brain by imagining going for a ride and mentally rebooting, ready to go out on the bike. And final point, any kind of training, there is a real problem here, is that we don't retain it. It simply disappears from our brain. Ask anybody what they were trained in, and 30 minutes after the training course, they will have forgotten a big chunk of it, which is why I provide people with notes and why I follow up now with a video session to run through what we covered, as much as to tell them how they did. This is a psychological issue that's been known about for well over 100 years, that we do not learn well from training courses. What makes training stick is repetition, is going back and doing things over and over and over again. Even when we think we're expert, it's embedding the memory of the action into our brains, and it's likely to become a far more permanent response to whatever the issue is. So use visualization to mentally repeat and review training, and it will help make sure it sticks. Now, the basic concept that I talked about here is expanded dramatically in my book called Mind Over Motorcycle, which you can find on my publishing page here. And right, okay, got a couple of comments just before I wind off. Paul, oh, that's very nice of you to say that, Paul. Thank you. Elevenses is never boring, he says. Colin, hello, Colin. Nice to see you there. He's talking about charging points again. Yeah, you could do the combination of charging points. Yes, okay. I mean, hopefully, I'd like to see them put into street lights outside my house. The only problem is the nearest street light, of course, is about 60, 70 meters away. Anyway, there are all sorts of problems there to worry about, but probably somebody else's problem. Right, okay, that's it for today. I'll run on a little bit today with the theft story and the visualization story. If you want to find out more about visualization, drop me a line. I've got some articles which I can point you at, or as I say, there is the book. And oh, Terry's looked in. Hello, Terry. Nice to see you as well. Yeah, you've never seen students take note on training courses. Yeah, I'm always one sitting there with a sheet of paper and a clipboard and a pen. Yeah, because I can then go back and review, try to remember what you were taught without doing that, and you'll forget most of it. Absolutely. Right, and Kevin has also, he says he's practiced emergency stop and evasion regularly. Yep, just add the visualization and you'll be better equipped than Kevin altogether. So think about the mental side of the maneuver as well. Right, okay, that is it. As I say, we're overrun a bit today. Thank you very much again for looking in. The next show will be out on Wednesday morning. Hopefully not too hot in my sort of improvised studio here. I might have to have the fan running if it is. It's off at the moment. So, all right, if you are out on the bikes today, cover up, stay out of the sun if you possibly can. Remember that clothing covers you and stops you overheating. It's not just for protective purposes on days like today. So, right, Dave, do stay shiny side up, and hopefully I will see you again on the next show on Wednesday.